A special meeting of the Waco City Council on April 14th, 2020 to order at 1:31 p.m. Joining me online today are Mayor Pro Tem Andrea Bearfield, Councilmember Hector Cedito, Councilmember John Kennard, Councilmember Dylan Meek, and Councilmember Jim Holmes. Please join us for a moment of silence. Thank you. On March 16, 2020, the governor suspended various provisions of the Open Meetings Act pursuant to his state of disaster authority. The change was effective on March 16, 2020 until further notice or until the state disaster declaration expires. In accordance with social distancing guidelines and while providing as much transparency as possible, the Waco City Council meeting will not be open to the public. This meeting is being broadcast live at wccc.tv. The audio is being recorded and the recording will be available to the public. According to the Attorney General, statutes that may require face-to-face interaction between members of the public and public officials are suspended, provided, however, that the governmental bodies offer alternative methods of communication with their public officials. This includes public comment on agenda items. In an effort to allow for as much public input as possible, those who wish to submit their written comments on a listed agenda item were asked to submit their comments to the City Secretary no later than 2 hours before the meeting. At this time, City Secretary Esmeralda Hudson will read into the record the comments submitted to the City Secretary by 11:30 a.m. this morning.
Mayor and Council, we received no public comments today.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Esmeralda. The first item on the agenda is to consider Resolution 2020-247. This is a resolution consenting to the continuation of the declaration of local disaster and public health emergency issued on Tuesday, March 17, 2020, and amended on Thursday, March 19, 2020, Monday, March 23, 2020, by Mayor Kyle Deaver, and is ordered by the City Council of the City of Waco, Texas, on Tuesday, March 24, 2020, and as extended on March 31, 2020, and as may be amended by the City Council of the City of Waco, Texas, authorizing additional authority related to a local disaster and public health emergency and providing for a penalty. This morning, Judge Felton and the Commissioner's Court extended their county-wide order to expire on April 30th. I'd like to ask for a motion extending the Waco City order to April 30th as well.
Motion for approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, please poll the council.
Holmes?
Aye.
Meek?
Yes.
Kennard?
Yes.
Cedito?
Yes.
Bearfield?
Yes.
Deaver?
Yes, that motion carries. We will enter into the retreat discussion, and Wiley will introduce the presentations.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Good afternoon to all of you. If you recall, on February 11th, we had a retreat to talk about the city's strategic direction, and although today that seems like a lifetime ago with all that we've been through since then, but I do appreciate the council's being available for our retreat, because as we move forward into our budget discussions, the items we have on the retreat today are critical to us in the budget process. So I'd like to introduce Tressa Gamblin, our business support manager here in the city manager's office. She's going to do a run through of the discussion points that we had from the retreat February 11th. I think you have seen the PowerPoint presentation. She'll run through that. And then Deputy City Manager Bradley Ford is going to follow up that with some discussions about one specific goal. With that, I'll turn it over to Tressa.
Okay, thank you, Wally. It's not working.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
Okay, here we are.
Okay. So you'll probably notice this first slide is similar to one that you saw back in February, but this again is just kind of a map of all of the different levels of our strategic plan we're kind of been looking at. The first four, vision, mission, core values, and strategic goals, were the ones we kind of did a deep dive into in February. We're going to start with vision, and kind of, as you can recall, this is what we drafted as a group. It says, our home where everyone belongs and thrives, moving forward together. And I just want to get feedback as we go through each one of these to make sure we don't have any more thoughts or changes we want to discuss, as we go forward. So for the vision, are there any changes or discussion on this one?
Tressa, hi.
Hi, Andy.
One of the things that I know we talked about in the sentence is comma placement or needing another word. So if it was while moving forward together, or comma, moving forward, comma, together. So I need to know where the emphasis is, because that, grammar matters.
Yep. Yes, and I think we actually discussed that with staff. We did discuss replacing that comma with while, so saying where everyone belongs and thrives while moving forward together. Is that kind of where you're coming from, or do you have an additional comma?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, that.
Perfect. I can make that change. Anything else?
But to which?
I'm sorry, say that again. To which?
I said, but to which? So our home, comma, where everyone belongs and thrives while moving forward together, or our home, comma, where everyone belongs and thrives, comma, moving forward. I mean, so it wouldn't be our home, comma, where everyone belongs and thrives, no comma, moving forward, comma, together. Where are my English teachers when we need them?
Didn't one of those be a semicolon too? As long as we're throwing that in there.
Mm-hmm. Or, semicolon, moving forward together.
Yeah, if we keep it that way. Or, so you're saying our home where everyone belongs and thrives, semicolon, moving forward together is an option, because it kind of separates that piece. We can find
Two full thoughts, one full
Yeah.
vision. Mm-hmm. But let's not kill it in the wordsmithing, but let's just make sure, and I guess the reason I brought it up was because depending on how you punctuate the sentence, the meaning is different.
Okay. Okay, well, we can polish that up. Any other thoughts?
So is the council comfortable either way, whether we replace the comma after thrives with while,
Yeah.
or we put the semicolon and leave one comma in there? Are you comfortable either way?
I think I'm getting thumbs up. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Then we will move forward with the mission. As it stands today, it says providing exemplary municipal services for citizens and visitors in a collaborative and transparent manner, which honors the public's trust. Oh, sorry. Let you read over that again, but do we have anything we want to change on that one? Nothing?
Looks good to me.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to values. Again, these were a collaboration from some focus groups that I facilitated in December and January, and then again, feedback from you guys in February. We've come up with 5 values. First one is provide excellent and innovative services. Second is team focused. Third, invest in people. Fourth, do the right thing. And last, equity and inclusion in all we do.
I would like to make a recommendation on this one, please.
Sure.
I would like to move. I mean, I know these are not numerical. However, when people read this, to me, they read it as order of importance. And I would like to move either equity and inclusion in all we do, either right under provide excellent innovative services, and right above team focus.
Okay, so put that as second on the list there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
I can do that. Any other feedback?
My feedback is let's make these consistent. There's either a verb, noun, or you got some verb nouns. You've got some just concept. You got what is our value? Team focus. It should be focusing on the team or providing excellent, innovative services, considering equity, inclusion. Make it consistent. I don't have any issues with the identification of the values, but make the wording consistent. Yeah, you see what I'm saying?
Yes, I got it. Yes. Great call out.
Invest
Yeah,
in
I agree with
people.
that completely. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I do too.
The first word needs to be an action word.
Yep, I've got that.
Yeah.
Okay. I will make those changes. Anything else? Okay. And let's move to the last slide, which is the one we spent. You ready, Esmeralda? Okay, there we go. So these are the 7 goals that we all agreed upon, and I will go ahead and read through these. After we have this discussion, then we'll move into some more tactical discussions from this point with Bradley. First is sustainability and resiliency from the far left on here. Second is economic development. Whoops. Second is economic development. Third is safe and vibrant city. Fourth, enhance quality of life. Fifth, improve infrastructure. High performing city and create culture of equity.
So along the same lines that Jim brought up on that last slide, I like the approach, and I think it's the same that Wiley just said, which is starting with an action verb. So enhance quality of life, improve infrastructure, and create culture of equity. To me, those all work as goals. The others are just topics, it seems to me. And so I just think we need to change the wording a little bit on these. I'm not sure what we mean by economic development without a little bit more description there.
Because is that not the same thing as a what do you mean when you're saying high performing city? Do you mean from an economic development standpoint? What do you mean?
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be even more defined at the next level as well. So maybe, do we want to have that discussion next, Bradley, and then we can come back maybe to see how we want to, at what levels, how much detail we want to have in these strategic goal level? Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
Sure.
All right, so if that's okay with you guys, I'm going to hand this off to Bradley, and then we can kind of work together on that transition to the next level down on that map.
But we will be adding an action word to
That's right.
start off each of these, and then potentially adjusting the positioning consistent with what we did on the core values.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to look at that too, if that's okay with the council.
Good.
All right, good job, Tressa, getting us going here and leading us through that discussion and really helping develop the strategic map and goals. A very profitable discussion, I believe. Also, I want to give some credit to the graphics team who's put together in-house graphics that will ultimately be useful to communicate the council's strategy map to the public. Really, the council's accomplished almost entirely setting a vision, mission, core values, and goals here. You might say, are we not done? But in reality, it's time to think about how we tie these elements to our budget and our city activities. And it's also time to talk about how do we track progress towards the strategic goals that you've set and see if we're heading towards those goals or away from it. And really the answers to those kind of questions require the staff to take the strategic map to a more granular level and work to produce appropriate objectives, initiatives, and performance targets for each goal. So today I'm going to kind of conclude our discussion by walking through the staff's recommended approach on how we do that in a way that really builds up the organization's ability and capacity for performance, as well as allows the council and manager's office to monitor how we're doing on those key goals. I wanted to start certainly by taking a moment to think through the roles of the council and city manager related to performance management. And as with all things in the council manager form of government, the council is really focused on the big picture policy decisions. And the manager's office responsibility is to ensure the day-to-day work is on track. So in my mind, we're right on target in that the council is setting the goals, values, mission, and vision. And now the question becomes, how will the manager's office ensure there's meaningful progress? So as we think about where to go with the strategic map and how to ensure it doesn't sit on a shelf, I wanted to walk through kind of what our approach is. Esmeralda, I'm stuck. Will you click me? We're learning. All right. The approach we recommend taking to take this next step is to really start small. No, this is it.
No, you had another one.
I know, I came back.
All right.
This is the right one. Thank y'all. The approach we recommended taking was to start small. Really, when you start thinking about creating a culture of performance, you want to get down into those program managers, all the way down to the people that are actually doing the work, and invite them into the process. And that's not something you can just do in one day. So starting small to me really means identifying a few well-selected performance targets and saying, instead of saying we're going to track 1,200 different things all at once starting in October, I think we've all seen how that sort of approach can really get out of hand quickly, and particularly if it doesn't start with buy-in from the department staff who's actually doing the work. Second kind of point I wanted to highlight is, we don't want to set up a performance system that allows for an adversarial or a gotcha mentality. Certainly, my first job in public administration was working in a police department, and I saw this play out in the early 2000s with the CompStat era, where it was essentially just a gotcha meeting every 2 weeks of leadership trying to prove to one another who was the smartest. And that's really not what we're looking for here. We're looking for a team-centered approach to produce good results. And that ties into point 3, which is that we really, the city manager's office nor the council can really be afraid of bad news or missing a target. That's a reality that's going to happen. We can't be so worried about missing a monthly target that we set artificial performance measures to be too low or too high, or we just decide not to track the hard stuff that really will make a difference. Additionally, I think we just all need to be honest with each other. We really need to create a some capacity in our staff to move towards outcome-based performance measurement, because cities are infamous for tracking inputs and outputs, like how many people came to a cleanup event, and not necessarily tracking what the outcome of the event is. And so we really want to start small and create that culture and build up the team. So we feel like taking the next couple of months to work as a team to really develop objectives, initiatives, and performance measures is the right approach. And we feel like in those months we can craft an online performance management report for the council and the public to start using by October. And we think that'll be significantly aided by a recent acquisition of OpenGov, which has dashboard components that are customizable to our performance monitoring. To kind of paint a picture of where I feel like we're headed for these performance targets, we've drafted an objective under the safe and vibrant city goal, particularly for animal services, just kind of display where we think we're heading on this. All right, it's now showing on your screen. And of course, we've selected animal services for this illustration for a couple of reasons. One is we never get tired of telling the story about how the council and community transformed this shelter from a facility with a live exit rate of under 40% to a no-kill, best-in-class shelter as it exists today. But one of the challenges, frankly, that we saw last year that the management team recognized was that we're starting to get what's called shelter fatigue in our staff. And really looking down the road, if we didn't continue to improve, there was at least some risk that we wouldn't be able to hold on to some of that success that we'd found. So early in the fiscal year, the management team started working towards better data analysis of our intakes and our outcomes so that we can ensure we could hold on to our monthly 90% live exit rate. Help me out, Esmeralda. For some reason, I'm not getting any.
Okay. It's got you there.
Thank you. So to give you a sense of where we started that process with data analysis in the shelter, I've shown you kind of what we were using, which is just a daily report card that showed on this particular day, we had brought in 33 animals and we'd had 14 animals go out. And so that's a day in which a net 19 animals came into the shelter. We needed 19 new kennels for animals to be cared for. And so it's just a snapshot every morning that was provided. And as you might imagine, on days like this, when you saw a large number of animals coming in, the concern would immediately start to rise that from our animal partners, as well as an ever watchful city manager that gets these reports too. Starting at 6 a.m. in the morning, people are asking, well, do we have room at the shelter for all these animals that we brought in? And this is really kind of a classic case of counting an input and an output. And it really didn't report necessarily how well we were doing in operating a shelter or provide the necessary forward-looking guidance to management on how we should respond to that data. So the one thing that was missing from this daily report was how the increase in animal population on this day impacted the facility's capacity, meaning could we house these animals? And so with consultation with the staff, it became obvious we need to start reporting daily occupancy of the shelter. And so you'll see that adding in to the bottom left of the screen, that's now part of the daily report. Starting in October of 2019, we started tracking that occupancy, and it allows our animal services team and our partners in the community to see not only how many animals came in and went out, but how those animals are collecting into the shelter's capacity. And I think it was fun to go back and look since October, the end of October when we started tracking this. This is the animal shelter occupancy for dogs only over that roughly 5.5 months. And you can see the ebb and flow of our occupancy. There's days when it's above 90, and as it sits today, it's around 36%. I just think that's a really interesting way to look at a performance measure. And I want to be real clear in saying it's not the simple addition of the occupancy rate that drove this performance change at the shelter. But what the addition of the performance measurement has done has allowed our management team to make different decisions based on the occupancy level, the known occupancy level in the shelter. So during times when occupancy is down, meaning a low number, we can hold animals for a significantly longer period of time before making a difficult euthanasia decision, which absolutely helps tie back to our goal to have a live exit rate greater than 90%. Or times when we have higher occupancy in the shelter, animal management staff can work with the Humane Society of Central Texas and our animal partners to boost our social media presence, or move quickly on clear the shelter events, or reducing adoption fees to drive as much of adoption activity as possible through the shelter. So we wanted to show you this example because we felt like it was a kind of a clear way to show how well-selected performance measure can really tie into an objective as well as into the council's goal of having a safe and vibrant city. So with that, I'm hopeful that was clear to see how that might work, and how we find a lot of value in the discussion the council's had related to strategic goals, and how we intend to tie those goals into our work programs. With your nod today, the staff proposes to use the next couple of months to create a small number of objectives, so think 10 to 20 in my mind, that would tie into your goals that are knowable and trackable for our team to monitor progress on your stated goals, and we anticipate being able to start that when the budget year rolls around in October. With that, that's all I'd planned to cover, and I think now it might be time to work back to those strategic goals. Is that what you're thinking, Tressa?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions for me at this time, Council?
Hey, Bradley. So the only thing that, and the approach is noble and I think doable. My only concern comes in when dealing with equitable outcomes. How is that if for those who have had, Race Equity Institute training, for those who've been to groundwater, which is, all city management council, a lot, most department heads at this point, how is that filtering down? Because I can foresee how you would have some gotcha moments in equity work if people don't understand it.
I think that's a great question, and that's why we need to take a couple months to work through that.
Right, and I think that is a great question, because it made me think about some of the things we've done with our spay-neuter program and our Spay Street Waco program, and I think we can incorporate maybe some of those statistics into the performance model that will go right to the heart of the equity issue. And I think we've done some great work there, reaching out in the community. We need to do more there, because if you look at the intake at the shelter, we still do have some challenges with that intake, and the key to managing that intake is the Spay Street Waco program. So, Councilmember, I appreciate you bringing that up, because it made me think of that. We need to use that program for its maximum benefit, and that and some other resources that we have to ensure that we've taken equity into consideration.
This is Holmes. Great work, Brad. I think the more data that we can bring to this and the measurement that we can bring to our goals and our missions, and see how just a report card to us on how we're doing as council too on focusing on certain issues and focusing on the goals that we're setting here and the progress we're making toward that. It makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, I disagree. I think that this is the right step for us to be taking, and we're going to have to play with it, and there's going to be stuff that comes up, and we're going to have to work through it. But I think this is a absolutely appropriate step, and we're going to appreciate it from our level. But I think the whole organization is going to as well, because it's going to provide clarity, and we'll know what winning is. And if people know what winning is from the top down, I think organizations function in a more healthy way. And so I think Councilmember Barefield brought up a great point. I think there's going to be other things that we're going to have to figure out exactly how to hammer it right, but I think we'll be able to do that. So I look forward to the next couple of months and what we can come up with.
I want to add, I really do like the effort and the intention of really looking outcome-based performances. I think most of my council members, if not all, really like the data that's been provided for us, because we all know that numbers do not lie, and you cannot argue with actual numbers. And so as we move through this process, I'm very excited to see where our organization currently is with some of our goals that we have in place, and where we want to get to, and I think that gives us an opportunity, even as a council member, to really see where our focus needs to be and how we need to adapt policy to see those goals come to fruition in our community. And so I really do appreciate that. One of the things that I will add, even when it comes to equity and inclusion, and I know I've said this numerous times, but I'll say it again, keep in mind, please, that equity and inclusion does not just relate to race, but it's also related to our deaf community and people of other languages, and our veterans community and our homeless community. And so as we move forward with equity and inclusion, that we keep all of that in mind. I know even for me, it's real easy to get focused on race, but it goes much more above and beyond that. And so I just want to make sure that as we move forward, that we're taking that into consideration. But I appreciate the work that's been done. I appreciate the path that we're on. I really do feel that we're on the correct path with what has been laid out before us here today, and the work that council and staff has done over the last prior months. And I'm excited to see what's to come. So thank you all for that.
Yeah, I'll just echo and just say that I think that the accountability and the deliberateness that this process will bring into that, so we can actually see it on paper and be able to track and evaluate the goals, objectives, and the things that we want to work on, will benefit us and help us make sure that not only our priorities are being reflected, but that the work that is doing is being effective and meaningful. So I like where we're headed.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm sorry. I've got mute on one screen and not on the phone, so I'm not sure exactly. It's my first time to be at home doing this. No, Bradley and Tressa, thank you both very much for your work on this. Bradley, I love the way that you've tied this down from getting it down to the objectives and actual work items. I will say that there are going to be some things, I think, where it's going to be very hard to measure outcomes, and we don't need to forget about those items just because we can't track outcomes. We've learned that through Prosper Waco. I mean, I think we want to track outcomes everywhere we possibly can, but there are some things that we just have to do, knowing that they're making a difference from some other objective measurement. But this is great work, and I appreciate all the work the staff has put into moving this forward.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor.
You got any follow-up? Tressa?
No, I was just going to say I will go ahead and add some verbs to these goals and send that back out along with the other changes we discussed. So, and then we can move forward from there in Bradley's work, if that works.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing too from the council, this is a package deal. We've got a vision, we've got mission, we've got core values, and we've got goals, and we're doing the work, the outcome-based work that Bradley was talking about. And as we do that, we don't want to forget our core values.
That's right.
That needs to be our focus there, and I think that was one of the points I was picking up. So we will certainly make sure we consider that. Thank you. Thank you, Tressa. Mr. Mayor, if we're ready to move on, our next topic is discussion of the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget and capital improvement program. Paul is going to lead this discussion. Paul Kane, Assistant City Manager. And then as part of this discussion, we'll also be talking about general fund assignments. And then the last component will be a discussion of the current council budget priorities and whether or not the council wants to consider making some adjustments or additions to that. So with that, Paul.
Thank you, Wiley.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I want to walk you through financial update and looking at our agenda. First thing I guess I need to do is thank our finance department, particularly Director Janice Andrews and her staff, Isaiah and Laura, done a lot of work on this, and just want to publicly thank them for all their efforts. When we look at the agenda for this presentation, we're going to start about a month and a half ago, and take us primarily through the end of this current fiscal year, looking at where we were, where we thought we were going to end up, now where we think we're going to end up, talk a little about fund balance and assignments and our bond rating, how they look at our fund balance and reserves, their view of those things, talk about the strategy for the development of next year's budget, look at general fund capacity, debt capacity, and then talk council priorities. All right. Thank you, Esmeralda. So where were we? What could have been maybe is a better title for this slide. Fiscal year 2020 trend prior to COVID. You can see the budgeted sales taxes were around $39.5 million. We had already collected $21.5 million to date. So we were projecting that sales tax was going to do pretty well. We'd be up about $3.6 million, coupled with projected savings and expenses, as we typically have. The total amount, we like to say to the good, $5.8 million to the good, would have offset our fund balance drawdown, which right now is just under $16 million. So we were on a good track to do some good things, and then the COVID pandemic came to us, and so now we're trying to figure out exactly what the impact of that will be. So we took kind of an optimistic and pessimistic view, a rapid resolution to the crisis, and then a slower resolution, and assumptions were based on that. So a kind of a two-pronged approach to give us a range. As you would expect, this is really uncharted territory for most everyone, I guess, unless you lived through the 2018 flu epidemic. Nobody alive today has much experience with this kind of health crisis. 1918, I'm sorry, 1918, not 2018, 1918. Nobody has much experience with this, so we've tried to look at a number of different sources. We use ZAC Tax, which tracks sales taxes collected in the community and from vendors. We've also looked at news outlets. Our financial department has done an analysis there. We've talked to our financial advisors. We've talked to other cities about what they're doing, and we've even looked at some foot traffic data that reflects foot traffic into retail sales locations before and after the some of the shutdowns that you saw related to COVID. So we've tried to cast a broad net in terms of figuring out what possibly could happen. So when we talk rapid resolution, you'll see throughout this presentation that term rapid resolution. It looks at and assumes that we're going to come out of this fairly quickly. Early April, May, sales taxes, for example, would be down 35% and then bounce back in June and then July and after, so a fairly quick comeback. Pretty optimistic, perhaps, but that's the rapid resolution side of things. The slower resolution assumes a lot longer and lasting negative financial impact on the city of Waco and on our revenues in particular. On an average basis, sales taxes will be down 60% for the remainder of the year. Of course, other lesser accounts are adjusted as well. So you can see the two spectrums. Again, no one knows exactly what they are, but this was a place we thought we could start with in terms of looking at a range. So the next slide looks at our general fund revenues exclusively and the impact of those, and again, the rapid versus slower resolution projections. On the rapid side, we're looking at a deficit of a little over $5.5 million, and then on the slower side, a deficit pushing $12 million. You can see in the graph there that we're looking at about $1 million loss in property taxes, which is primarily due to refunds of previous settlements, tax settlements from appeals that were made. So we have that $1 million in either scenario, and then you've seen the sales tax numbers, how they vary between the rapid and slower resolution there. So the largest dollars are in that sales tax area. You can see under the slower resolution, it's 7.8% or $7.8 million of the $11.8 million deficit in revenue. So that gives you some sense of the range that we're talking about. Next, we'll look at the expenditure side of the equation. The expenditure side is a little bit different. You don't have the same sense of rapid and slower economic recovery. Perhaps maybe optimistic versus pessimistic is a better way to look at it in terms of expenses. But you'll see here that in the expense category, in the rapid resolution side, the difference in salary and wages and benefits between the two ends, rapid versus slower, is really related to the aggressiveness of the projections that we made or the assumptions that we made in calculating savings from vacancy and turnover and those kinds of things. The largest expenditure saving is down in the line that you see marked other, that $2.15 million. That is comprised of some savings that we're going to have. We actually budgeted a $1.7 million expense on the sales tax side to adjust or to account for growth and kind of build a little buffer for us, so we will not need that. And then there's so we have about 1.4 of that that we're using here, and then the $750,000 that the council put in the budget for staff salaries is actually reflected in the salary benefits above it. So that 2.15 million is savings from that sales tax number as well as the salary number. And then you see on the slower side, we also have $700,000 for the zoo and $500,000 for the golf course. And those are projections, very, very early projections of what the general fund might have to pitch in to support the minimal operations going on at the zoo and at the golf course today. Those numbers will obviously be refined as we go forward. So what does all this mean? The total effect, I guess, on the general fund and ultimately on the fund balance of the general fund is a range. We talked about the revenue side, expenditure side. So under the rapid resolution side, we're looking at perhaps a $2 million drawdown on fund balance gross. On the slower side, we're looking at almost $10 million gross drawdown on the general fund. You'll see inside the box there where it lays out those numbers, and then it talks about some reductions that we can do fairly quickly and honestly fairly painlessly in terms of service delivery. Some reductions that we can make in terms of transfers and refunding some accruals and some other things that we can do in the current budget to make some reductions. You'll see at the bottom there it has a to be determined number for what I wrote here is hiring freeze or freezing hiring, and that really is probably a better way to put that would have been managed hiring, but typically cities will look at some form of a hiring freeze during difficult fiscal times to try to curb expenses, and that can range from an all-out freeze where no positions are hired or filled to something that's more tailored or managed towards perhaps vacancies are not filled or non-essential positions are not filled or something like that. So we're still working through that as a staff, and we haven't assigned numbers to that yet, but that's something else that we can look at that could potentially save some dollars. So the net effect of those reductions really lowers the drawdown needed to support COVID to just over $500,000 in the rapid resolution side, and then just under $6 million on the slower resolution side of things. So that kind of walks us through the revenue picture for this current fiscal year as we're seeing it now here in mid-April. Then the next question obviously is, what does that do on the fund balance side? And so I want to walk through a couple of things here that we've been looking at with regard to fund balance and assignments. Our fund balance, if you look at the CAFR from 9/30/2019, the fund balance is actually in a number of categories or boxes, or however you want to look at it, pockets of money, different segregations of that fund balance. So of the $87 million, about $30 million of it is in what we call undesignated and unassigned. And then we have about $25 million in capital. So if you're looking at the graph, we're starting at the bottom and moving up towards the top. $25 million in capital. Economic development is about a little over $8 million. All other assignments, 2.65, and those are actually rollover encumbrances primarily, and specific departmental assignments. Then we have WebMec, which is a restricted portion of the fund balance at 13.7, and then non-spendable, which I believe is largely related to insurance, I believe, and inventories, that is non-spendable. So you see that gets us to the total of $87 million. Couple of things I want to point out here. The financial policy for the city is that a minimum of 20% of expenditures will be kept in reserve. I'm not going to be talking about that anymore. Let's set that aside for a second and talk a little bit about how our bond rating agencies look at our fund balance. You'll see in the middle of the graph a line at 30%, and that really is the minimum floor, if you want to call it that, for, in Moody's case, a AA1 bond rating. That's one of the criteria they look at, is that your reserves have to exceed 30% of your general fund revenues, which is different from our policy. But I put that on here to show you kind of what that means to us today and going forward. So if you look at 9/30/2019, 30% hits towards the top of the blue portion of the column. What that essentially is telling us is that our undesignated unassigned balance reserve in the black there of about $30 million, to get to the 30%, we have to actually use, if you want to call it that, or account for a portion of our capital money in order to get to that 30%, and then you see the values above that. So what's happening is we're kind of going through two different exercises. In one case, we are looking at our fund balances and our assignment monies, and then talking with you and amongst staff about how those assignment monies could be used for capital. However, there's a very real, from a bond rating standpoint, cap or limitation, I guess you'd say, in terms of how much of those fund balances can be spent, and that's 30% in order to, again, maintain the bond rating of AA1. So what we've done here is show you that 30% line straight all the way across. So in September of 19, we were up around 54%, way above the 30%, because the bond rating agencies count all of the reserves. And so you get the full benefit of those, even though those are actually assigned to other things, and in the case of WebMec, restricted to certain things. Not money that council could spend, but yet bond rating agencies count that. So what becomes a challenge for staff, and certainly in the finance department wrestles with this, is how do we show the reserves clearly and in a transparent way, and also monitor how we're spending or drawing down those assignments over time to see where our impact is. So one thing that occurred to us, and we want to get your thoughts on today, is it certainly in our mind would be simpler if we could find a way to move that lower bar, that undesignated, unassigned, the black area on your chart, move that towards 30%, so that is a simple way to show bond counsel, and also for us to account internally, and then to report to our citizens and stakeholders where our reserves are in relation to that 30% threshold. So what we're showing you here in 9/30/20 and beyond is taking that capital, and we'll spend about 15 million of the 25 either this year or early next, and then the $10 million that's left of that capital assignment, we would put that into undesignated. So that's the growth that you see in the black portion of the column. So that puts us up around 24.8%. So we're getting closer to that 30% in that one specific category. Our thought here is, again, it's easier to manage, it's more transparent, and it really gets to the heart of what the bond rating agencies are looking for here when they set a 30% threshold. They're saying they want to see that we have reserves equal to 30% of our revenues in order to meet any obligations we might have in our bonds and to our bond holders. So we feel like that's really a better way to show that by putting it all in undesignated and unassigned. And while I've been talking here for a few minutes, you want to stop here and maybe get council's reaction to it, since you can't see them. And
sure.
Council, I think I'll stop there and maybe just get your initial thoughts on what we've talked about so far, and in particular this idea of the 30% and trying to move dollars into our undesignated and unassigned that meets that 30%.
Yeah, this is Holmes. I'll start. And I agree that bond rating is like holy of holies. I mean, it's something that you should try to preserve the best you can and not encounter a downgrade because that starts chasing investors off. Makes the execution a little bit tougher and the terms tougher. So I like your respect to that, to the bond rating. Now, I'm trying to get familiar with the definition of reserve and how we've been careful about pushing it up from 18 and 20 and now I'm trying to get.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Holmes, you broke up a little bit. You might want to repeat that. We missed part of your comment.
I'm just going to get on here. I'm trying to get familiar with how we are defining the reserve. Where it was, we're showing 19%, and we had, I think our council had it at 18, pushing towards 19, and then going all the way up to the 28 in a projection. Are we just redefining what we consider an unassigned reserve or an assigned reserve? I'm not understanding. 'Cause in fact, the matter is looking at that first column. Yeah, we had that much cash, so we had a pretty good size reserve. But help me with the definition of what we're calling our old-time reserve, which was 20%. Now we're talking about pushing it up instead of theoretically.
I think you're right. In one sense, we are redefining a little bit about how we account for, rather than having 7 or 8 buckets with different monies in it. We're talking about trying to combine those down to 3 or 4 at the most.
That's right.
So yes, you're right. In one sense, we are redefining what we call reserves to make it a little more simple, a little more straightforward, and also, Jim, we want to not show that. For example, with capital, you see the large blue portion of the column, about $25 million in assignments for capital, and it leaves the impression to both staff and council and even the citizens that we have $25 million available for capital expenses in addition to all our other funding sources. And the reality of that is we really don't, because that 30% bar is eating up a lot of that blue. So we want to kind of redefine that, as you said, and set that at 30% as a minimum, and try to reduce the number of pots that we have money sitting in. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, that does. So tell me real quick, this is Kennard, what happens? So we've got, again, that's part of reserves, but 25 is assigned to capital, and we're talking about taking, I think you said 10 of that and putting it into undesignated, unassigned. Are those the projects that were contemplated under that original assignment? Do those just not get done, or what happens to that from the capital standpoint?
I'll go through that here in just a second, actually, on the next slide.
Okay.
Won't talk specific projects. We'll give you some indication of that's good, thank you. This kind of breaks down the drawdown that we're talking about. So in this case, the 15 million is in the orange colored that have the bracket around them. It says capital assignments. So the 9.3 is money that council has already approved and has been approved at a council meeting and encumbered for a contract. That 9.3, and of course the majority of that is the suspension bridge. Then the 2.37 are some of those other projects that you mentioned, Councilmember Kennard, such as the fire station, Elm Street. Some of those projects that are familiar to council are listed in that 2.37. And then going on beyond that into the future, in the 3.48 portion of capital, those are future projects that we'll need to spend some time with council going over what we want to do with the remainder of the money. But 17th Street Bridge, the quiet zones in downtown Waco would be examples of funding there. And so that's where the 15 million would come from. We have many more projects that we could fund, but it gets back to the point I was trying to make on the earlier slide, is we have a limitation into how much money we can spend. Because if you don't mind, can you go back one slide for me, please? As I didn't really get into this a whole lot, but as you can see, as we move forward, if you look at the what would be the fourth section, the purple section of the graph, you can see that it all but goes away by 2023. Those are economic development obligations that we have into the future that will draw down the economic development assignment to virtually nothing by 2023. So that's a portion of that cushion that we're losing. And so we're trying to plan for how all this money is going to be going away into the future and lowering our percentage. And you can see that in 2023 we get right around 25.8% of on the general unobligated side, but the total is only 35%. So we're just 5% above that minimum in 2023 because of the ongoing projects that we've committed ourselves to already. So we are trying to take that into consideration and raise the flag now to say, you know, all of these assignments are going away or need to be put into a different pot, as Jim mentioned. And so we're trying to show that. You'll see that towards the end of the graph on the right, the majority of the money is in undesignated and unassigned, and then the orange is WebMec money that we can't really access in any event. So that's kind of where we're trying to get the eyes to focus on, is a few years out where we'll be as we continue to draw down the fund balance. So thank you, Esmeralda, for backing up there. So on this slide, this shows you that we have a very significant drawdown from one year to the next. Council will remember that of that $9.3 million in capital assignments, part of that money for the bridge, we did have council approved a reimbursement resolution. So if we have the capacity in our future bond sales, we'll be able to repay that back, and that will help replenish our reserves some. And then you see the other costs going up on the economic development side, which are the portions of the column in green. We're looking at about $170,000 to the Keene project at Creative Waco, and then census for the census project, a little bit of money. The 1.69, about 1.2 million of that is for transit as part of a previously reserved council action, and then about $90,000, with $50,000 of that being for the LaSalle corridor project and $40,000 being for STEAM center study. And then the 1.97 million is economic development reductions based on the contracts that we've approved already. So that gives you some sense of that significant drawdown that we're having from 19 to 20. So the next question with all this is, so what happens with COVID and how does that impact us? And so you'll see this slide is very similar to the others, or the other that you saw a couple of slides ago, but it adjusts further. 9/30/20 comes down by about $5.9 million, and you see the impact there. I think it's interesting to point out at 9/30/20, the black portion, which is our undesignated. So to get to the 30%, we're using all of our undesignated, all of WebMec, and a little bit of our economic development money in order to reach that 30%. And that really points out, I think, what we're trying to get towards in terms of policy change in the future is, let's not count money that we know either we can't really touch in the case of WebMec, or that we have obligated to other things via contracts. In the case of economic development, let's move that black bar up some more, get it closer to 30%. You see in 9/30/21, assuming we can reimburse ourselves for the bridge, all of that would go in to that undesignated amount, pushing it very close to 30% in 2021. So this will show you the impact of the COVID loss, assuming we can keep it at around $6 million. The next,
So,
I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Holmes again. What is the ultimate impact or effect or implication of reducing that assigned capital? Because that's really the only thing that's changing, right? We have capital assignments now, and we're talking about not having any capital assignments going forward, right?
Yes.
I'm just looking at that. The blue goes away. What's the impact of what happens there? What's the good thing about that? What's the bad thing about it? what doesn't matter. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think, Jim, there's some good and bad. I think if you look at, let's use the purple, for example, here in this graph, you can see how the purple is declining over time and eventually going away. By 2023, it's all but gone. If I had treated capital in the same way, it would do the same thing. It would be spent over time and then go away. And the problem with that is if we kept going on that track, the black portion of the column doesn't change a whole lot. So we need to, as you were talking earlier, pull it out of that blue bucket and put it into the black bucket so that it's kept and held and not spent. Because as we spend it, the whole column is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So the impact, Jim, in one sense is it is a positive in that it puts it in that undesignated, unassigned reserve that's typically referred to as a city reserve, and then operating reserve. And then the other thing it does is it keeps us from overspending those capital dollars to the detriment of our bond capacity coverage. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around, because the blue part, they signed.
Yes, sir.
It's truly assigned to a project, right? We've approved it in a budget.
It's assigned.
Yes, we want to do this.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jim. It's assigned to. I would say it's assigned to the notion of capital projects, and within that, through various workshops that council and staff have had in the past, there have been projects identified, funding reserved for future things, and I think it would be important for us to sit down with council in the future soon and go through those project by projects. I think there's some ones that we could probably weed out, and we can keep this spreadsheet going live during that discussion and show the impact overall. But there hadn't been formal council action in terms of adoption of an ordinance or a budget or anything like that with regard to those assignment projects. They're just listed in a spreadsheet at this point.
That's right. And if I might add,
Janice is coming up for some additional comments.
Okay.
Hi. I just wanted to add that in years past, as we've had additional funds at the closing of the year that are over our 20%, which our now goal is 20%, at one time it was 18%, we've just put those in the capital assignments and not really identified specific projects in many cases for those. So we do have some projects, but we don't have projects tied to all the money. We could certainly identify a lot of projects to go with the money, but at times, we've just added money at the end of the year without specifying projects for it.
And I'd like to add, and y'all correct me if I say this wrong, but the reality here for us is we've got our financial policy is not 100% aligned with the way the bond rating agencies view our unassigned dollars. And it's important for us to not spend into what we represent to the bond rating agencies. And so we've been kind of getting a false picture for ourselves that we've got a little bit more money that we can assign to projects than we really do from the bond rating agency's perspective. And we ought to keep those aligned with one another, because this is just a temptation that, that I don't need. Because it looks like we have more money than we really do have to spend. We could spend it, but we would be outside of, I think, the presentation, the representations we made to the bond rating agencies. So I think what Paul's proposing and what Janice is proposing here is to bring those in closer alignment, and then only consider surplus and available for assignment anything above 30%.
That's very correct. That's exactly what we're talking about. And one of the things that we had talked earlier as a staff, a simplistic way to look at this is, let's say that the floor was 30, the ceiling was 35% on the black portion of the column. If revenues got above 35%, rather than stick them in an assignment or reserve them in some kind of way in general fund balance, we would essentially scrape off the excess, put it into a capital projects or a capital projects reserve fund, And it would be reserved there for capital project usage for the council to decide how they want to spend it. So it would be treated kind of as we've done with assignments up to this point, but we would go ahead and scrape it off and put it into a separate fund so that we're not counting it towards our bond coverage requirements. If that makes sense. So that's a fairly simplistic way of looking at where we're headed.
So we're just eliminating the distinction basically between assigned and unassigned, right? Isn't that?
We're trying to get.
In my mind,
yes, we're trying to get it away from assignments, Jim. That's correct.
Yeah. We would have reserve, which would be the 30% if we go this direction.
yeah.
We would have anything above the 30%, probably we would want a little cushion in there so we could maintain the 30%, but anything above that and the cushion would be surplus. And then once that a project is identified for some of that surplus, then it would be tied to that project as a project commitment.
Right.
And we could list those projects, the council could see them, and they could also be online in our, from a transparency standpoint.
And they could even be listed in your capital budget, your CIP budget that you adopt, with a funding source as being surplus. And so right now it's very informal.
You were within that under 30, I guess, or you'll have basically unassigned funds, but you'll have. Okay, we're not calling it assigned anymore. We're calling it committed to projects or something like that, or
not below 30, Jim. Above, I'd say a cushion. So say above 35, we would scrape that off and put it into a separate fund, a capital projects fund, as Wiley said, assigned to a specific capital improvement project that the council would approve in the budget. So we would be out of the assignment business. All of the reserves that you see reflected in the general fund balance reserves would be truly operating reserves as traditionally defined. So we would not have assignments here in terms of projects or economic development projects or anything like that. It's just too easy.
Just going, for instance, to the SEP 20 and the SEP 21. Within that 21.3%, we will have projects identified that we clearly want to finish, or in the old nomenclature, assigned capital. I just want to make sure we don't drop under our 20% on truly unassigned. It's not going anywhere. We're holding it there for rainy day or disaster or whatever.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're preserving that concept.
What we're talking about, Jim, is our rainy day fund would be always equal to at least 30% of our revenues. That's essentially
but
what
within
we're
that
saying.
30%, you're going to have a project.
No, there would not be any projects in that 30%. It would truly be a rainy day fund, a reserve that we would hold to assure our bond buyers that we have sufficient revenue to pay them back if the economy tanks. So that 30% would be hands off, reserved, socked away.
Once we get there.
Once we get there.
And so the projects then would be above that line?
Yes, the projects would be above that line, and as Wiley mentioned, Mayor, perhaps a cushion, let's say a 35%, so we have a 5% cushion in there. Anytime revenues get above 35%, then we would scrape those off, and those would go into a capital projects reserve fund, and they wouldn't show up here at all. We would get them out of this assignment because we don't want to count money that we intend to spend in our overall reserves for bond rating.
Because right now the ratings agency gives us credit for
Yes.
that capital assignment, and we're just saying we're going to be just making it clear and more straightforward by doing it this other way, where we go ahead and just say 30%, just cash,
Yes.
reserves, then
Right.
and then a little cushion above that. Then beyond that, we'll just have those capital delineated, and the ratings agencies and ourselves will understand that neither of those count towards our actual unassigned reserves.
Yeah, they would not even show up in a general fund, a table like this. They would show up in a capital projects reserve.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay.
But in doing this, we would be more financially stable should we have another I mean, hopefully not, but should we have another pandemic like COVID-19 down the road, us being at the 30%, once we're there, at least we know we have that for a rainy day, and it puts us in a little bit better financial backing.
I would agree with that. Yes, sir, I would. And I would also say it eliminates the possibility that we spend money we think we can spend now and then find ourselves in a bind later and say, oh, we thought we could spend it, but we really shouldn't have. That's a great point, Hector. Thank you. Next, just we didn't prepare a whole lot of numbers for fiscal year 2021 yet. We're still working through that, but we have instructed departments to prepare a base budget essentially for next year with no big changes, no additional personnel, staffing, large expenditures, anything like that. So we want to delay into those big things till we see how the pandemic response and recovery plays out over time. Now, one of the things, for an example, that's going to be a challenge for both staff and the council in this process as we move forward, as you know, our actual checks that we get from the controller's office lag about 2 months behind the collection, right? So COVID began mid-March. April will certainly be a downtime, May as well. Perhaps we're recovering a bit into May. We won't see those dollar amounts, those actual collections, until the June and July checks we get from the controller's office. So one of the things that we're going to be doing as staff and asking council to be patient with us as we work through this is we want to get as many of those actual collection checks in so we can see how bad or good is it based on actual numbers, and then we can make both year-end projections off of those actual checks and certainly revenue projections for the next fiscal year off those checks. So we want to do everything we can to use the best data we have, and right now we don't have any data, any current data at all to tell us what's going to happen post-COVID. We are speculating just along with everyone else. So we'll be working with council, and as we go through the different work sessions and budget and audit meetings and other things, talking with you about that. But you can expect that we will be pushing it right to the very end in terms of getting a budget put together and adopted so that we can have the best numbers possible. All right. The last thing, I just wanted to leave this with you. We are looking at our debt capacity into the future. Just a couple of things to note. Over the last 5 years, our growth in TAV, or taxable assessed value, has been right at 7.6%. Fairly strong, and we are looking at the 2020 numbers and beyond, perhaps dropping down 2020 maybe is 3%. And our speculation there is that we've got some indication from some folks that it's around 4.5-ish maybe now. We strongly expect there'll be a lot of appeals coming up in post-COVID days. So we've dropped that down pretty conservatively to 3% next year, and then inching back up a little bit over time, but really nothing close to the historical average. And then we forecasted out what our debt capacity is for each of the next few years in the black numbers there at the top, and you see those anywhere from 39 million down to from 40 million to 33 million, in that range. All of this is speculative. It's based on the values, it's based on interest rate assumptions, it's based on our ability to shift pennies from one side, O&M, over to the other side, debt service. So there's a whole lot going forward here. Our tax value is still pretty strong, even at 3%. So we don't think that our bond capacity is going to be severely hammered, but we'll just have to kind of wait and see on that. So the last slide that I have is really a recounting of the fiscal year 1920 council priorities as we had them last year about this time. You see those listed there, and we talked this morning in our meeting that typically when we think of priorities, a lot of times we're thinking those are areas where if we have additional funds, we'd like to direct them our council would like to direct them into the future. And that's true, and we do use those priorities for that. The other side of that coin is perhaps in more challenging times, they also become the place where we want to hold the line, areas that we need to keep as priorities in terms of funding, and perhaps if adjustments or reductions are needed, they recur in areas other than these. So as you think about your priorities, certainly we want to be optimistic and hope that there's some additional money to spend and we can redirect it to your priority areas. If not, if there's no more money, or worse, if we actually have to make reductions in our operating budget, we want to know those areas that you want us to visit last in terms of cuts, the high priority areas. So stop here, leave that with you, and Wiley, you want to leave open to comments, or?
Sure. Yeah, council members have any comments on the budget discussion or these priorities?
Councilmember Holmes.
Yeah, so can you go back to the slides that talk about the budget that we're currently in? Or is that the end of the presentation?
Yes,
on the
yes, sir.
current budget that we're in?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm seeing everything right. I didn't know
Right
what
there.
else was going to be
Go
in the
back.
presentation.
Go back one more. No, I'm sorry, up one more, towards the end. That one. So, Jim, this shows the two different net losses. Is that what you're talking about? These are essentially, it's like an income statement, revenues versus expenditures, and where we're going to end up current year.
Yeah. Go back to the. Can you go back to another one that shows the revenue?
Okay, two
I
back.
just want to.
There you go.
All right. So. Okay. And then go to the one that shows the expenses
Next one up. That's
or the
there you go.
overhead.
That's expenses.
And so our salary and wage, it really isn't coming off under either, just slightly, I guess, right?
Around
Either.
700,000 in the case of the rapid, which is really the optimistic, and then about half of that under the slower, Jim.
Okay.
So what that's telling you essentially is all of the raises that council has approved and Wiley has implemented are reflected in those numbers, and due to vacancies, we're still going to save some money.
What's the head count now at the city?
1,500-ish?
1560 is
1,560
is the total number of
That's
positions.
fully employed. That's
But-
fully
yeah, I think-
employed. But what's the
I think we have about
actual
100.
head count?
About 150 vacancies, but Ryan's going to ask Missy. She's standing outside.
Okay.
Around 200,
And so
she
on
said.
those-
About 200, she says.
So on those, okay. So on those 200 or whatever, I guess for critical positions that we're trying to fill, we'll go ahead and do those. But what did you call it before, Paul? Not a hiring freeze, but a hiring management.
managed hiring might be
Yeah,
a better way to
there's
put
some
it.
police. There's some police officer positions in there. There's a police chief position in there. I think there's some firefighter positions. So there's some we're certainly going to want to fill.
Yeah.
But as
Other
far as
questions,
and then
comments?
go to the I want to make sure that public safety and all that is takes a priority as we
Sure.
manage the hiring for sure. Can you go to that next slide again? I'm sorry, I'm thinking of things as we go on here. So the slower case, we're 10 million short on the fund balance, 5.8 after we take those reductions.
Right.
One thing that I'm seeing in the business recovery task force that I'm in is, and I don't know how this works in liquidity wise, but we're getting some feedback, and I'm not sure how this fits in today's agenda, but I at least want to bring it up here as we're talking about liquidity and budget for the rest of the year. From the small businesses in the city, we're getting great feedback on the PPP, the federal program, the payment protection program, but there still are people falling through the cracks locally in small businesses that aren't qualifying for whatever reason and that aren't getting in there. I want to at least consider, not in this meeting today, as we move forward, the possibility of creating some sort of backstop for that population of small business operators to somehow accommodate. And I don't know if it's what the amount of money is, but I'd like staff to start looking at it. That we could create some sort of fund that we could help small businesses with, not to the extent obviously of the PPP where they're given $10 million loans, but on a much smaller scale. There are other cities that have done this: El Paso, Buda, and Austin. And at least I would like to quickly look at the feasibility, how we would, if we could fund it, how we would fund it, because certain ones of those already have HUD allocations and have been in place for a while. But I would just quickly like to get that staff to look at the possibility of bringing that into a possibility of identifying an amount. Because, and again, I can follow up with staff on what we're seeing in the business recovery group and kind of the need that we're seeing there.
Sure.
If it's possible for the city of Waco to step in and help, I'd like to see that.
We'll look at that.
Yeah, I'd agree that it's worth exploring. I think we're juggling a lot right now, but it would be a good time, I think, to just look at the other models that exist and if we have a role to play in it.
I do have a couple of questions about the presentation. And first and foremost, Paul and Wiley, thank you so much for the presentation, and Janice as well. Can we go back to the slide that shows where the graphs over the years, that one, yes, exactly. Now, is this based on the rapid resolution or the slower resolution, the anticipated trend of how we're going to get there?
That's a great question, Hector, and I should have been more clear. When we're talking about fund balance, the 9/30/20 impact is based on what we would say the worst case or the slow response. The years beyond that are based on projects that we've identified in fund balance. In other words, we're not projecting any further drawdown from operations beyond 9/30/20. The rest of those drawdowns in 21, 22, and beyond are from capital projects that we would expect to be spent over that period of time. Does that make sense?
So, yes, sir, it does, and thank you for that. So 2020 is what I would call a worst-case scenario with a slower resolution. So if we recover quicker or more rapidly, then the outcome for 2020 could look a little better.
Yes, sir.
Am I safe in saying that?
You are correct in saying that. That's right.
Okay, perfect. Well, I was hoping that you would say that it was based on a slow resolution, because this gives us the worst case scenario, and so any changes to this only could be improved. And even as you talked about in the couple of slides over as the bond, and we don't want to have our bond affected, I would be curious to see, and I know you guys are still waiting on that information, but perhaps when you get it, if you don't mind, if we can do a little bit just analysis with council as how it affected our bond, whether in any way or none at all. I would just be curious to know that. But I mean, overall, thank you so much for sharing this, and you guys amaze me how you make magic happen with the current situation. And so thank you so much for putting this together. I appreciate it.
Thank you for that. I think one thing we said in all of our discussions is we don't know what's going to happen with COVID, but it probably won't be these numbers. It'll be something different than that. We're trying to be conservative and as best we can, but honestly, until we start getting some of those early sales tax numbers from March and April, we just don't know.
Sure. It makes perfect sense. Thank you so much for that, Paul.
Yes, sir.
No, and the only thing I'll add is I think this illustrates the good work we've done over the past several years in being fiscally conservative. There are a lot of communities that are in a lot worse shape than us for whom this is going to be a real challenge. So the fact that we have the leeway that we do and we're able to talk about going ahead and upping our reserve requirement on the unassigned side to 30%, and we have currently the flexibility to do that, even though it will present some operational challenges. I want to extend my appreciation to council and staff for their good work to this point of being financially prudent and diligent to where we should hopefully be able to weather this, not without impact, but without any truly adverse consequences, hopefully.
appreciate that. It's well put.
Yeah.
Well put.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Paul and Janice, Wiley, and all your team, thank you for the hard work that's led to this. I think this is a great presentation, and we know that you all are going to be continuing to model this as we go forward and adjust as circumstances requires. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We really do appreciate that. It's the council's always given us good conservative financial guidance, and as Councilmember Kennard said, I think that's what put us in a position to be able to bring these numbers to you and to bring some scenarios to you where we can make sure we're considering those things that are going to affect us over the next few months and really affect us in this budget process. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, in upcoming budget and audit meetings as we develop the budget. And I want to say the work that the council did with Tressa and Bradley and really the entire team on the goals, and then the continued guidance from the council on the priorities, your priorities, will really help us in this budget process. And as we move forward and try to get to outcome-based performance-based budget in these departments, I think now is the perfect time to do that, because as they're bringing a budget that's going to be real sensitive to revenue forward, this is a great time to have everybody's attention on that. So, again, I appreciate your guidance on all this. Our next presentation is Mr. Pashowski, our HR director. We have a part of the input we got from our employees as Tressa did her visits with different employee groups. Was about an additional holiday, and so Missy has some information on that and a proposal for the council to consider. So, Missy.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. So as Wiley mentioned, Tressa Gamblin, the city's business support manager, held cross-functional department meetings from mid-December to early January. 76 employees participated in those cross-functional meetings, and they were from various levels within the organization. They were asked about what they felt the city's current values, goals, and culture are, and then also asked about what they saw as the future for the city. In several of the sessions, multiple employees brought up adding the observance of Veterans Day as a city holiday. Currently, the city of Waco observes 10 holidays, and they're listed there on the screen. Human Resources conducts a peer city survey, a benefits survey every year of our 11 peer cities, and the survey conducted this year showed that 9 of our 11 peer cities observe 11 or more holidays, and 6 of the 11 observe Veterans Day as one of their holidays. Additionally, McLennan County observes Veterans Day as a holiday. And last November, the city wanted to recognize our veteran employees at a council work session, and we had over 130 employees express interest in participating in that recognition. The city has a rich history of supporting our military services. Richfield served as a military airfield and training facility for some of the earliest military pilots during World War I from 1917 to 1921. The Freedom Fountain just outside the convention center was built to memorialize the trip that a group of Wacoans made to Paris in 1971 to meet with representatives of North Vietnam to discuss the treatment of prisoners of war. It stands as a monument for freedom for past and present veterans. Camp MacArthur served as a military training camp and officer training school in Waco from 1917 to 1919. Waco Army Airfield, later named James Connolly Air Force Base, was opened from 1945 to 1966 to train pilots. The Doris Miller Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center began its long history of serving veterans in Waco when it opened in 1932. This medical center supports the needs of veterans with psychiatric and medical rehabilitation. And Waco is the home to Doris Miller, the first African-American recipient of the Navy Cross for his bravery during the Pearl Harbor attack. Based on the feedback from our employees, Peer City survey data, and Waco's supporting history, HR is recommending adding Veterans Day as a city holiday starting in 2020. And that concludes my presentation.
Questions or comments?
I think it's appropriate that we do have that as a holiday, because that was kind of I think I asked the question at last year's council meeting, you know, what all employees, particularly the City of Waco employees, were veterans, and it was quite a number, as Missy said, and I was a little embarrassed that those guys don't get the day off. So I think it's the right thing to do here. Good, it's a good move.
Yeah, I agree. Makes sense.
I agree. I agree with Councilmember Holmes. Yes, I think that's a good move.
Absolutely agree.
You're getting head nods from everybody, so sounds like that's universal, unanimous support.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Missy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Missy.
Our next presentation is discussion of the governance structure for the Waco Convention Center and Visitors Bureau. Deidre Emerson, Assistant City Manager, is here for that discussion. Deidre.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Deidre.
All right, so the majority of you know that the Waco Convention Center and Visitors Bureau's mission is to generate significant regional economic activity by attracting conventions, trade shows, and other events to its facility and to other meeting and event venues in the Waco area, while maximizing the investment return for the residents and businesses within the city of Waco. So today I'll be providing you some background on the process to get us to where we are today in regards to the governance structure for the convention center. I will review the background, the process that we've gone through, the model recommendations that were presented previously, and actions taken to date and anticipated next steps. Jones Lang LaSalle, formerly known as Strategic Advisory Group, was originally engaged in 2015 to complete an operational study of the Convention Center and Visitors Bureau, focusing on maximizing the investment return for residents and businesses. In 2016, they were separately tasked with completing a deeper review of operational and governance models. During that process, a 10-member task force was appointed by the council. The task force was representative of various aspects of the community. In 2017, the final report and recommendations were presented to the council. The final report contained 5 key recommendations and 9 areas for implementation. The report recommended a change in the operational structure, which I will detail in the next slide. The report also recommended a change to the board structure. In 2018, the City Council dissolved the advisory board, which had a representative from each council district. The new commission is now comprised of 9 members and is more industry specific. There were 3 model options provided in 2017. Option 1 was a nonprofit organization for Convention and Visitors Bureau with a publicly managed convention center. Option 2 was a nonprofit organization for the CVB with a privately managed convention center. Or option 3, the current structure with an enhanced advisory board. During the same time period, we were in the midst of recruiting a new director. The council at that time agreed to maintain the current structure with an enhanced board and review the governance structure within a year. So during that year's time, we were able to hire the new convention center director, Todd Burka. The new board was established. The booking policy was reviewed and revised, which prioritizes large conventions. A formal standing operating procedures manual was developed. Marketing efforts were enhanced. A capital plan was developed, and the pay structure has been reviewed with filling a number of key positions. So our next steps in this process is to finalize our food and beverage policy, finalize the pay structure, which would include an incentive pay plan, and finalize operational policies and procedures to go along with it. At this time, if there's any questions, I'll turn it over to Wiley.
Thank you, Deidre. Questions from the council?
Questions or comments?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for this quite a while about the fact that the recommendation that came out of that task force 2 years ago was to move this to a separately incorporated nonprofit with the CVB under the governance of that organization. And that while the advisory board that we did was kind of a compromise stopgap for that, it seemed to be the will of the community that we moved this organization separate outside of under the city's auspices. That was the recommendation of the community at the time. That's still my recommendation and hope this right now. And I'd like to be able to get a consensus one way or another from this council as to whether or not we still want to respect the will of the community and work towards moving the CVB outside of the jurisprudence of the city, understanding that particularly at this exact moment, with where tourism, hospitality, and the hotel industry, particularly the tax receipts, are, that budgetary wise, it's not the absolute best time to do that. But I do believe that this phenomenon, while it may last a little longer than we'd like it to, is still temporary, and that there's still, I think, significant benefits to be accrued in going on and pursuing the recommendation of the community leaders 2 years ago to move this outside of the city's jurisprudence.
Hector, did you want to speak?
Go ahead, Hector. I just had a quick question. So, Councilmember Kennard brought up a good point with the current situation with COVID-19 and how we've had to adjust to it. I'm curious to know that, and I don't even know if staff can answer this, but I'm curious to know that if at this time, if, for example, the convention center, the CVB was its own entity, how it would be impacted in a current situation like this. And I don't even know if you guys can even answer that. If I'm asking something too crazy, please let me know. I'm just curious.
Wiley, can you speak to that, or is that? Well, that's been one of my great concerns, and sure. I've been glad that we have not been in that structure as we've entered into this crisis. But if you have any more detail on that,
sure. Well,
I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, there's several examples. First of all, I think we would just with the revenue shortfall, the general fund would be having to pick up a major portion of that budget. We have already taken some action to preserve the convention center fund so that it will, at least portions of it will still be there when we come out of this. Paul Kane, Assistant City Manager, and Deidre worked together to develop, to get our revenue departments, our enterprise funds that depend on the general fund, to put a plan together so that they could make their way through this current crisis without additional general fund money. We did get a report from Todd Barker, our director there, that summarized a lot of the challenges they would face along the way. The biggest one we have looked at here lately is that the convention center has a major HVAC replacement over $1 million that we have put on hold because that is a significant portion of their fund balance.
That's correct.
And so we've held that. The bid is good for a couple of more months, and we're hoping as we come out of this that we can go ahead and award that bid and get that work done, because as the convention center re-ups after this, depending on whether we're on the slow or the rapid cycle here, it would be nice if there was air conditioning over there in August. And so we have taken those things into consideration. And then some of the employees that are non-essential over there have been sent home. Many of them have been reassigned to other departments to help us with things that are essential. We have some at EOC, and we have some other places in the city organization. That's working well for us. If we were under a private board, that would not be as easy an option for us because the employees would not be city employees. So yes, sir, we have looked at this very closely. We have more, just as Paul said, preliminarily we've done a lot of work here, but we have more to consider as we look at hotel motel tax and their funding sources over the next few months. Hope I answered the question.
The one thing that I want to mention that was not mentioned earlier in the things that have happened since the task force and the consultants made their recommendations is we went through the situation with the zoo, which was a private nonprofit running our zoo to a large extent, and we brought all that stuff back in-house. And I think that gave me, seeing some of the things that had occurred there, gave me a lot of pause about then wanting to move the CBB out, even though that was the recommendation prior to that occurring.
Yes, sir. And were you looking for a response on that, Mayor?
Well, I mean, and I recognize the two things are not the same, but there are a lot of similarities between the two that just gave me some real concern.
Yes, sir.
I'll jump in here too, because I'll echo the mayor on that. Because this is all kind of happening at the same time. I think 2 years ago, 2 3 years ago, 2017, as Deidre laid out, where we had kind of the very similar management construct issues on both the zoo and the convention center, and one was kind of going one way and one was kind of going the other way. And the result kind of ended up being sort of the middle or the same on both. But I think it is worthwhile to revisit this, and maybe right now is not the proper juncture on the convention center. But I do recall that the recommendation of JLL was to, as John said, spin it out and make it an independent board. And that said, I think the slide that Deidre showed on all of the progress that we've made in 2019 and 2020, Todd Burke coming in, I think there's been a lot of good things happen there, and we've made a lot of strides in the current management construct or board construct. So I'm pleased by that. And I think that, again, I think it's worthwhile looking at it again. I don't think right now is, from my perspective, it wouldn't be, in April of 2020 is not the time to be thinking about redoing the construct. At least through the end of the year, let's get past this COVID thing and maybe take a look at it first quarter next year. My observation.
So thank you, Deidre, for. I'm sorry. Did I jump in on you, Dylan? One of the things that I think we probably, or my question is that I know one of the concerns was with shifting to the nonprofit, the ability to incentivize sales staff, right? But I believe, that you all have found some methods that we can still do incentive-based sales, even under the constructs of remaining within the city management.
Yes, and so
right?
Yes, that's correct. That is one of the recommendations that was presented through the JLL recommendations, and we have internally worked and identified the ability to put those incentive plans in place.
Okay. Because I do understand how being able to do that and push for the growth and development with the CVB was important, especially for staff. But I'm just, and even though, no one could have prepared, mine was ready to preparing for the pandemic, but this just shed a lot of light on where we would have been if we had adopted that structure. And I'm not, saying that the city leaders at the time were mistaken. I'm just saying that now, even with the bringing the zoo back in house, looking at what would have happened if we would have switched structures, timing, God's timing is perfect, however you want to see it. But I just think that this would be the time for us to really look at what holes we were trying to fix or what problems we were trying to fix and shifting, and see how those can happen internally, and then move forward. And if they can't be, then you look at, okay, well, maybe we need to look at it another way. But I want to know if the major issues that came up with making it an external organization can be rectified keeping it internally?
What I was gonna say, and I've said this before, is if we were to ever spin it out at this point, from my perspective, I think the drum that I always beat is the marketing. I'm personally more comfortable with the facilities being a nonprofit, but I don't see this council right now being ready to pass over or hand off or even add another agency that's trying to work on the marketing and branding of this community. I think there's already a lot of institutions that are wanting to weigh in on that conversation. And so, for what it's worth, whenever we have a discussion on this, if we do press pause and revisit this at a later date, that's something that I feel really strongly that there's still work to be done. And I like the idea of us at least knowing that we've gotten the marketing piece. Again, I'm just speaking for myself here in a little bit better place. I think we've come a long way, and I'm really pleased with where we're going, and I'm really thankful for the work our CVB's done. I think there's a little more work to be done on that. And so before I see us transitioning to another agency who's stewarding that, I would want to land and do a little bit more work. So anyway, that's my perspective.
Well, I'd like to, first of all, I want to thank Councilmember Kennard and the other members of that task force that did all the important work that has gotten us to this point. I think we've made an awful lot of improvements, as has been stated, in our operation and in the way we're marketing the city. And I guess my question, John, is what else do you see, what benefits do you see that have not been achieved that you think could be achieved by going to the independent organization?
Sure. Well, I just want to say, I don't think the comparison to the zoo is very fair. Even as a separately managed, ostensibly organization that was more half and half, our general fund contribution to that organization was growing. It almost doubled in the last 5 years. Yeah. While let's be clear, up until this past month, and even now, we don't have the revenue in this once in a literal century event. The CVB not only did not take a general fund contribution, but was self-funded, but actually the general fund charges them for resources back into the general fund. So, in terms of the way it was being managed and the way it was being handled as a organization, it was not dependent on the general fund at all. And I think we've got the right management in place now to move this forward. And I think if the recommendations of the task force and which included leaders from arts and culture, the county, Baylor University, the local chambers, local higher education institutions, other private sectors, to make this an independent organization that may not necessarily a nonprofit, but a local government corp that could, similar to the Baylor Waco Stadium Authority, that could even put in other recreational assets that are within our community. I think given the opportunity to diversify itself, to be independent, and to garner the flexibility and responsiveness to and think more holistically to the community at large, I think it very well could succeed and do well on its own. Understanding, again, this literal once in a century environment makes that argument at this today a little tough. But a month ago, if we were looking at this, they not only weren't taking a dime of general fund money, they were being charged from the general fund. And so, and they are a self-supporting agency, and I think they can continue to be a self-supporting agency with some appropriate leeway and a little bit of runway time. And I think that, I just see, every community does it differently. Others, where it started like this, it has thrived like this, and others, and sometimes it's been brought in, other places where it has been under the auspices of, say, a municipal organization has been brought out. I just, as chair of the board for the last 2 years, by y'all's approval and by y'all's kind of authority, I really do believe that this, and I appreciate kind of Dylan's remarks and the work on the branding and marketing. And I think that an organization that was truly overseen, controlled, and directed by the community at large could achieve. I don't think there would be duplicated efforts. I think that organization could look more holistically than just the within the city limits, and be able to more comprehensively and collaboratively achieve the goals from the tourism, marketing, and branding type perspectives that we want. I mean, I think we've done a good job to this point. I think management has done a good job leading and shepherding it, and I think, again, at this precise moment, that stability is helpful given the financial and just kind of broader dynamics. But I went through. I wish we actually had the task force report. I wish we had y'all been presented with the history and the conversations that went through, because I went into that process thinking that we should keep it under the auspices of the city, with the benefit of dozens of hours, many deliberations, lots of conversations, thought process, and whatnot. We came to a different conclusion. And I wish we had the opportunity to at least revisit that. And I know y'all have asked for that before, and I don't know if it's been provided to this point. But I think you need to see and understand that we went through this, and again, I originally didn't think we should, and then that's what I went in going, and I know others in that room did as well. And then we went through the process, and we came out saying we felt that for the community at large, and for the work that this organization could and should be doing, that it needed to be rolled out into a separate organization. And I had my mind changed, and I wish there was a way that I could convey to you again, encapsulate in a dozen plus hours of conversation and kind of visioning the steps that were taken and the rationale and the reasoning that went to our recommendation in the first place. But again, I understand the concerns right now. I really wish we could just say, hey, we understand, economically at this exact moment, it doesn't make sense to flip the switch tomorrow, but moving this process forward still, with an eye to having it done within the next year. I'm still ready to get this done. And I do fundamentally believe it's the right thing. I think the organizational structure could be situated in a way that would set them up to thrive on their own, even in a more challenging economic environment. But it takes some work. But I think it could be done, and I think if we were setting up where we want to go over the next few years, that this particular organization set up appropriately, independent, with oversight from leadership from the spectrum of organizations and stakeholders that comprise that task force that helped come to this conclusion in the first place 2.5 years ago. I think it could thrive and could achieve the goals that we have set for it. And so, again, I understand and I appreciate the perspective. But again, I've been, neck deep in this for, what was the timeline since 2016, for 4 years. And and over the course of that work and over the course of, interacting with staff and seeing their mission and understanding the purpose and kind of where we want to go with it, I've come to appreciate the flexibility that could be achieved and kind of the operational, robustness that could happen if we allowed it to move out from under the control and auspices of the city into its own separately governed organization.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? John, I certainly understand that, and I know you're invested in this. Largely, this is what you believe should happen at this point, and you do have the benefit of the time spent with the task force that we don't have. So I see no reason not to revisit this at some point in the future. But I just don't. It doesn't seem to be the will of the council to move that way now.
Which I understand.
Thank you. Any further comments on this item? Okay. Thank you, Juan.
All right. Thank you, Deidre.
Thank you.
Mayor and Council, our next presentation is a discussion of the National League of Cities Service Line Warranty Program. Ashley Nystrom, Executive Coordinator in City Manager's Office, has done the research on this, and I've asked her to make a brief presentation on it so we can have a discussion. Hey, Ashley.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ashton Nystrom, Executive Coordinator, City Manager's Office. I'm bringing to you today a brief overview of the National League of Cities Service Line Warranty Program. So what this is it's a warranty program to provide low-cost warranties to customers for their private side water lines, sewer lines, and interior plumbing. Customers pay a monthly fee, but then are not charged a deductible or service fee for any repairs or replacements that are covered under the program. The program has been in existence for 10 years. It's certified by the National League of Cities and administered by Utility Service Partners, which is a home serve company. The company operates a 24/7 hotline that a customer would call into, and then the company then hires a licensed local plumber to go out and address the problem. This program is offered at no cost to the city. There would be some staff time involved, particularly around the twice per year outreach campaigns. The company would like to use city endorsement on the outreach and marketing materials that go out to residents. And then there is also an option for cities to participate in revenue sharing. So the company promotes revenue sharing as a non-tax revenue stream that can be used to help low-income homeowners who can't afford a warranty or expensive replacement. There are over 750 cities nationwide who participate in the program, and within Texas there are about 40 participating cities. These are the cities who responded to our reference request. So the responding cities all generally support the program. They didn't report very many unresolved customer complaints. Most of the issues reported were with staff time arising from customers calling in to ask why the city was endorsing one program over another, or calling in to ask if the program was a scam or to verify. And then several cities did also recommend having a dedicated staff person to review outreach material prior to its release. The level of participation among the responding cities varies. Some cities had the mayor or a council member sign the endorsement letter. One has a staff member who signs the endorsement letter, and then others send out a general endorsement. Most of the responding cities do not participate in the revenue sharing aspect of the program. One does, and they utilize the revenue stream for a low-income housing repair program. Several of the cities turned down the revenue sharing option and used that offset to negotiate a lower rate for their residents. But again, overall, the feedback from these responding cities was positive. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Ashley.
I'll just kind of jump in. So this, as a NLC endorsed program and as one of the National League of Cities corporate partners, I'm very familiar with this. And again, like Ashley said, over 700 cities nationwide utilize this. There's 40 right now in our state that do it. It is no cost to us. And I think from our financial empowerment sort of ethos and some of the work we want to do, this is one where a lot of folks don't realize that the line from the meter to their house is their responsibility, and can be a fairly significant cost if and when that breaks at some points. This service, again, which is no cost to us. It's like the Texas Power Switch program is just asking to use our endorsement and our help, so people will know that it's not a scam. There are companies out there that will send us notify us that they're sending letters to everybody in the city touting their own service repair warranties that in services that we have no say in, no control over, no input in. This one endorsed by NLC, voluntarily with our support, uptake goes from, without our support, goes from maybe 0.5% to 10% or significantly higher if that happens. It's with low costs, and it provides what I feel to be a protection. It's voluntary. Nobody has to actually sign up for it if they don't want it. It just provides a protection for our residents in a way, and with a recognition that we understand what they're doing, and also that accountability that comes with it as well, that our citizens are protected, that it's all Waco plumbers that would be used if and when a warranty claim is made. And it's something that, like I said, something that other organizations maybe they'll send it out there without our auspices. This is one that voluntarily puts themselves, if we decide just to adopt their work, puts themselves under our accountability and with our input and with our, if they screw up, it's, we can badmouth them all we need to, but I don't think that's not what they're going to do. They've got good reputations elsewhere. And I think it's something that really does that I think it's worthwhile just from, it's a significant expense at some point in the life cycle of a lot of our homeowners, a lot of whom won't be able to afford it if and when that happens. And this provides a very accessible, equitable, and low-cost way of protecting them on a volunteer basis. They just sign up for it in a way that we are allowed to have some oversight and put some accountability on the service provider for this program.
I will say that a couple. Go ahead, Hector. I'm sorry. I was just going to say I heard about the program when I was at NLC this past March, and even from council members from other parts of the country, how much they spoke highly of this program. I love that it's being offered here in our Waco community. I do think that it is something that we need to take a serious look at, and I'm definitely interested by this. As Councilmember Kennard said, I mean, it is definitely an equitable approach to our homeowners, especially the homeowners that maybe have been in their home 20, 30 plus years, and if they haven't had a situation with their sewer line, it'll probably happen over the next couple of years. Just because of damage and wear and tear over the years. But I will say I even like the option of how some cities opted not to do the revenue share so they can negotiate a lower rate for the residents. And so I'm definitely interested by that. But overall, I am in favor and a fan of this program.
I'll just jump in here that does anybody else provide, and again, the way I understand it, is this an insurance type program for the sewer part, or is it the water part, or I got to go back and look at the presentation.
So, and there were some materials that were provided. I don't know if y'all all saw them, but MOU and I think maybe a sample letter that would go out. It provides, there are 3 tiers that you can opt into or out of all of them. I know, and Ashley, I don't have it in front of me, so correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there's a water line protection, there's a separate sewer line protection, and I believe there's even in-residence plumbing protection as well. Again, it's not all in one. You can opt into one or all 3 of them or none of them, but there are separate protections available for water, sewer, and in-house plumbing too.
That's correct.
Okay, and so this is the only carrier that does this kind of thing, or there's other. I get to the point where when you get my age, you get a lot of pitches to you about, buy this life insurance, buy this burial insurance, and so it's all very skewed towards high premiums because they don't know how long they're going to live.
I haven't gotten there yet, so I'm not sure about that. But again, there are other companies out there that will inform us that they're sending mailers out to all of our citizens, but we have no oversight or or they're not held accountable to the work they provide or which plumbers they use or how they go about their business. At least with this one, we're not out anything, or it's completely voluntary on behalf of our citizens, and all they're asking is that we, just like we did with Texas Power Switch, which was, we had the same kind of concern and conversation before, because there are others that can essentially do this work as well. We just want somebody that we know, that we can trust, that will do a good job, and that we can hold accountable in the event that something goes wrong with our citizens, and one that if we're at least acknowledging that we know what they're doing and that we believe they do a good job, and if we say that they better do a good job, we can hold them accountable if they don't. There is that extra layer of reporting and accountability to make sure that our citizens are being taken care of and that they're getting the value they expect when they participate in this program.
I just want to make sure the distinction I'm drawing between the two is the electricity was there. You're signing up, you're getting whatever for 30 cents a kilowatt or whatever. You're going to pay that. This one, the guy in good faith pays premiums for 10 months and then decides to stop, or 60 days late or something, and he gets canceled, does his claim. I don't know, just the insurance part bothers me a little bit, but I'm sort of generally indifferent. If the rest of the council wants to do it, I want to be careful about what we put that W on as far as endorsing this kind of thing, because what I don't want to happen is the exact thing I'm talking about. 6 months he pays a premium, 7, 8 he misses for whatever personal reason, puts in a claim, and he's left standing holding the bag, and the city of Waco has to step in to help. I have some reluctance when I hear these kind of programs, but again, I don't know them as well as Hector and John do, and I trust my fellow councilmen as far as moving forward.
Yeah, I'd say if we were like sticking our neck out as one of the first ones trying to adopt this, that'd be one thing. But there are 40 cities in our state alone that use them and are generally happy with them. There's always going to be an outlier, but I'm buying almost universally they're comfortable with the work they provide and their citizens. And so 40 in our state and over 700 nationwide. So this isn't something that I feel like we're a early adopter on or would be really sticking our necks out with. This is a proven company that could provide a benefit to our citizens, that has demonstrated competency and fairness in their actions across the country for the past decade.
And my last question on it, John, is the renters versus homeowners. This on people that are renting the house, it really goes to the homeowner, not the renter, obviously. So.
Yeah, this would be for homeowners because it goes on the water bill, and it would be just available for homeowners to, or it's billed to the person that pays the water bill. So it's it's billed to the owner. So it's just something for a homeowner to take advantage of. Yeah.
Right.
Make sure I say that.
Just to clarify, we would not be including that on the city water bill.
Yeah,
It'd be a separate bill.
Yeah, we would not.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I misspoke when I said that. Thanks, Ashley, for that clarification.
Thank you, Ashley.
That's all I have.
Councilmember Bearfield or me? No questions? Ashley, do you know what the various premium ranges are on this for the different coverages?
I did not receive a number. I've heard anywhere from $7 or $8 up to $12 a month. I think it depends per city.
And I think
that's something we would be able to negotiate. This was discussed earlier.
Right, and I think it depends on whether the homeowners pay annually or they pay monthly. It's a different rate if you pay annually.
And what does it change if we, opt out of the revenue share for the lower rate?
We would just have to look into that then, yeah.
We can get those
answers. Do we know what the
answers.
length of the contract would need to be, John or Ashley?
I don't know that.
I'm not sure
back
the
up with
initial
them.
term.
Mayor, I think if the council's wanting us to look further into this, I think we could contact HomeServe and work through some of the issues about the use of the logo, the endorsement letter, what the rates would be, and some more particulars about the program. As John said, that there is some literature that goes with this that could help, and we could do a follow-up presentation with potentially a recommendation on that.
I think that would be good. I do think this is something that we ought to put on hold until we get past the severe part of this crisis, and then it sounds like it's the council's desire to hear more about it, though.
Yes, sir.
I just hate to use any of our resources right now on this, either your staff or Jennifer's staff to explore this at this point. Is everybody okay with giving us a few weeks and then getting a presentation on it? Further clarification?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Any further comments on this item? Okay. Are there any requests for future agenda items? All right, seeing none, I would like to thank staff for the great work that they did preparing for this retreat and for all the work that they did to make this meeting work remotely. I know that continues to be a challenge, and you're all getting better at it each time. Thank you for your hard work on that. I do want to remind everybody that the census is still going on, and if you have not completed your census form, just go to census2020.gov and fill it out. It'll take you less than 10 minutes to do it, and if you don't fill out your census, then at some point we're going to have to send census workers out into the city, and obviously during the time of COVID-19, that's delayed right now, but we don't want to have to send people out. So if you'll just fill it out online, you'll avoid that. Tomorrow afternoon at 1:30, Judge Felton and Dr. Jackson Griggs and I will hold another press conference at 1:30. Hope you'll join us for that. I want to ask that you keep all the COVID-19 victims and their families in your prayers, including Mr. Taro Johnson, who died last week and was just recently confirmed to have had the COVID-19 disease. I want to ask that you pray for the healthcare workers and first responders and their staff, and ask that you stay at home and stay separated while you're out. We must work together to beat this disease, and we will win if we work through it together. Take care of yourself and take care of one another. With no further big business, we will adjourn at 3:42 p.m. Thank you.